"By summer you will birth our son," the prince said to the obese peasant woman. The court roared with laughter, but in that moment a cruel jest became a royal decree. She was no noble lady, just a miller's daughter, mocked for her size and scorned by all. Yet by law she was now bound to the proud heir of the throne. Inside the palace, whispers called her the miller's mare. But behind the walls, something no one expected began to stir a hidden legacy in her father's old journal. And a heart in the prince that was not as hard as it seemed. The powerful would rather see her destroyed than see her rise. Lies, secrets, and betrayal close in. Will she prove that true nobility is not of birth, but of character? Or will the weight of scandal crush her before summer's end? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The early spring breeze carried a bitter chill along the Saxon riverbank, where Martha Weiss struggled with her daily task of hauling water. Her arms ached as she lifted the heavy wooden buckets, her skirts already dampened by the splashing water. Though the winter frost had melted, the morning air still bitted her cheeks, turning them as red as apples. "Look at her waddle." A young voice called out, followed by cruel laughter, like a fat duck after rain. Marta kept her eyes fixed on the path ahead, pretending not to hear the village boys who lounged against the stone wall. Their taunts were as familiar to her as the creaking of her father's old mill wheel, a sound she missed dearly since his passing 3 months ago. "Peace, friends," she muttered to herself, reciting her father's favorite saying. "The Lord sees all hearts alike." The sudden blast of a hunting horn split the morning air. The sound of hooves thundered against the packed earth of the village road, growing louder with each passing moment. Marta's heart quickened as she recognized the royal hunting party approaching, their bright banners snapping in the wind. The flash of polished armor catching the morning sun. At the center of the procession rode a gilded carriage, its wooden panels carved with the royal arms of Saxony. Through the window, Marta caught a glimpse of Prince Leopold's stern profile, his features as sharp and cold as winter frost. As fate would have it, her foot caught on a loose stone just as the carriage drew level. Marta stumbled, her buckets swaying wildly. She fought to keep her balance, but the weight proved too much. With a cry of dismay, she fell heavily into the mud, water soaking her worn dress. Laughter erupted from the assembled nobles, high-cultured sounds of mockery that cut deeper than the village boys' jeers ever could. Marta's cheeks burned with shame as she struggled to rise, her sodden skirts clinging to her legs. The carriage door swung open with a sharp crack. Prince Leopold himself leaned out, his handsome face twisted with irritation at the delay. His cold eyes swept over Marta's mud-stained form, and his lips curled into a cruel smile. "By summer you will birth our son," he declared loudly, his refined voice dripping with sarcasm. The courtiers' laughter swelled like a wave, washing over Marta as she finally managed to stand. Among the crowd, the royal steward, a thin man with kind eyes, looked sharply at the prince, his quill pausing above the leather-bound notebook he always carried. His weathered face showed surprise and something else, calculation. Perhaps tears burned in Marta's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not before them. She gathered what remained of her dignity, straightened her back despite the mud and wet, and turned away from the jeering crowd. "I will not bow," she whispered fiercely to herself as she walked away, leaving her spilled buckets behind. "I am my father's daughter, and I will not break beneath their scorn." The sound of hooves and laughter faded as the hunting party moved on. But Marta's heart continued to pound with humiliation and anger as she made her way to her father's mill house. The familiar building stood silent now, its great wheels still, like a sleeping giant by the river's edge. Inside, Marta finally allowed her tears to fall as she sat beside the hearth. The flames danced before her eyes as she pulled her father's worn journal from its hiding place beneath a loose floorboard. The leather cover was smooth beneath her fingers. Comforting in its familiarity, she opened to her favorite passages, where his neat handwriting spoke of courage and dignity in the face of hardship. Though she had read these words 100 times, before they held secrets she had yet to understand, secrets that would one day change everything. As darkness fell outside the millhouse windows, the thunder of hooves once again echoed through the village. Riders galloped toward the castle, their cloaks billowing behind them like dark wings against the twilight sky. They carried with them news of the prince's words, his promise to the miller's daughter. Though Marta knew nothing of how that simple jest would soon turn her world upside down. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the royal council chamber, but it did nothing to warm the chill that ran through the aged steward's bones. His wrinkled hands trembled as he stood before the assembled council, the weight of his duty pressing down upon his thin shoulders. "Your Majesty," the steward's voice quavered, "I bring news of great import. Yesterday, in the presence of numerous witnesses, His Highness Prince Leopold made a public declaration." He paused, gathering his courage. The prince announced that by summer he would have an heir. The king leaned forward on his throne, his eyes sharp with interest. The counselors exchanged meaningful glances, hope kindling in their faces. For years, they had worried about the succession, watching as Prince Leopold rejected suitor after suitor. And who is the chosen mother? The king demanded that the steward swallowed hard. "The miller's daughter, Marta Weiss, Your Majesty." Prince Leopold, who had been summoned to the chamber, burst forward in outrage. "This is madness. It was merely a cruel jest, nothing more. I would never silence." The king's voice echoed off the stone walls. "Your word, given before witnesses, is law. We have waited too long for an heir. The succession must be secured. Father, you cannot possibly. I can, and I will." The king's tone softened slightly. "The girl may not be of noble birth, but she is a subject of our realm. Your word binds you, Leopold. The crown's authority rests upon keeping our promises, even those made in jest." Leopold's face twisted in fury, but he knew better than to argue further. He stormed from the chamber, leaving the council to make arrangements. Within hours, a royal carriage departed the castle, carrying guards and a message that would forever change Marta Weiss's life. The journey took 3 days. Marta sat in the luxurious carriage, her plain wool dress feeling coarse against the velvet seats. Each village they passed through erupted in whispers and pointing fingers. She heard the words that followed in their wake: "The prince's chosen one, the miller's daughter, a commoner to bear an heir." At every stop, Marta sought refuge in the local chapel. On her knees before humble altars, she prayed for strength, wisdom, and guidance. Her father's journal, tucked safely in her modest travel bag, provided what comfort it could. "Dear Lord," she whispered in one such chapel, candlelight flickering across her round face, "I do not understand your plan, but I trust in your wisdom." The castle, when they finally reached it, loomed before her like a mountain of stone and judgment. The massive gates groaned open to admit the carriage, then closed behind her with a sound like destiny sealing shut. Servants led her through cold corridors, their footsteps echoing off stone walls. They brought her to a chamber where several ladies in waiting waited with expressions that mixed disdain with duty. "Remove your clothes," one ordered without ceremony. Marta's cheeks burned as she was stripped of her familiar garments, the clothes she had worn while working at her father's mill. Each piece removed felt like losing a part of herself. The new garments they dressed her in were plain by court standards, but finer than anything she had ever owned. The wool was soft, the cut modest, but proper for a person of her new, uncertain station. Yet they felt like a costume, a pretense she could never truly inhabit. As the ladies worked, their whispers carried clearly to Marta's ears. The miller's mare, one murmured with a snicker. Another replied, "Poor Prince Leopold." Their laughter, though quiet, cut as sharp as winter wind. Marta stood still through it all, her father's words echoing in her memory. "Hold your head high. My dear, true nobility comes from the heart." She straightened her spine, even as tears threatened to fall. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. The chamber grew colder as evening approached. But Marta barely noticed. Her world had shifted completely in the space of 3 days, and she could only wonder what tomorrow would bring. Her new clothes felt like armor, but whether they would protect her from what lay ahead remained to be seen. The great doors of the presentation chamber groaned open, and Marta felt every eye in the room turn to assess her. Crimson velvet drapes hung from ceiling to floor, making the space feel like the inside of a jewel box, or perhaps a tomb. Her new court shoes pinched with every step as she approached the dais where Prince Leopold stood waiting. The whispers began immediately. "Good heavens, she's enormous," one lady tittered behind her fan. Another made a show of averting her eyes, as though Marta's very presence offended her delicate sensibilities. "Your Highness." Marta attempted the curtsy she'd been hastily taught that morning, her knees trembling with the effort. She kept her eyes downcast, not daring to meet the prince's gaze. "Miss Weiss." His voice was as cold as winter frost. "I trust you understand the unusual circumstances that bring you to court." "Yes, Your Highness." Marta's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Then you also understand that while protocol demands certain appearances be maintained, there will never be anything more between us than duty." Each word fell like an icicle. "You will have chambers in the East Wing. A schedule of your expected appearances will be provided. That will be all." He turned away before she could respond, effectively dismissing her. The court ladies' titters grew louder, and Marta caught fragments of their cruel observations as she made her retreat. The miller's mare in silk. What a waste of good fabric. Did you see how she wobbled in those shoes? The prince must be beside himself with horror. Back in her assigned chambers, Marta sank onto a delicate chair, praying it would bear her weight. The room was fine enough, all pale blue silk wallpaper and carved wooden furniture, but it felt as cold as the welcome she'd received. With trembling fingers, she withdrew her father's worn leather journal from where she'd hidden it in her skirts. The familiar sight of his careful handwriting brought tears to her eyes. She'd read these pages countless times for comfort, but now, away from home and desperate for connection, certain passages caught her attention in a new way. "The old grant must remain hidden," she read, her finger tracing the lines. "R. Family once held noble station. These papers could bring more trouble than benefit. Keep safe what was entrusted to us." Marta sat up straighter, her heart beating faster. She'd always assumed these were the ramblings of a tired old man, but here in the castle, they took on new meaning. Could there truly be noble blood in her? Families past, some ancient land grant that might explain why she'd been brought here beyond the prince's cruel jest. She closed the journal quickly as footsteps approached her door. No, this secret would remain hers alone for now. She tucked the precious book into a drawer, just as a servant entered to announce the evening meal. The dining hall stretched longer than her entire village square. Yet Marta sat alone at one end of a massive table. Candles flickered in ornate holders, casting shadows that seemed to dance and mock her. Servants placed dish after elaborate dish before her roasted pheasant. Delicate soups, glazed vegetables arranged like flowers, but her stomach was too knotted to eat. "Begging your pardon, miss," a soft voice made her start. A plain-faced woman in a laundress's apron had appeared at her elbow, gray hair escaping from beneath her cap. "You've hardly touched your food." "It's all so fine," Marta admitted. Quietly, "Nothing like what I'm used to." The woman Greta, by the name embroidered on her apron, glanced quickly around the empty hall. From her pocket, she pulled a small loaf of dark bread, still warm from the kitchen hearth. "Perhaps this is more to your taste. It's what we Balastairs folk eat." The simple kindness nearly undid Marta. She accepted the bread with trembling hands, breathing in its familiar, homey scent. "Thank you," she whispered. Greta's weathered face creased in a warm smile. "We common folk must look after each other, mustn't we? Even when some of us are wearing silk." She patted Marta's shoulder and slipped away into the shadows, leaving Marta with the first genuine comfort she'd found in this cold, glittering prison of a castle. The dawn light spilled across the servants' courtyard, turning the weathered stones golden. Marta breathed in deeply, savoring the honest sense of fresh bread and wood smoke that reminded her of home. Here, away from the oppressive grandeur of the main castle, she found unexpected comfort among the staff gathering for their morning meal. Greta sat beside her on a rough wooden bench, breaking a loaf of dark bread into shares. "Nothing fancy. Like what they serve upstairs," she said with a warm smile, "but it fills the belly better, if you ask me." The stable hands gathered around in their work clothes nodded in agreement. One of them, a gruff man with kind eyes, shared tales of horses he had known, making Marta laugh with stories of their silly habits. Another spoke of his childhood in a village much like her own, and soon they were trading memories of harvest festivals and winter traditions. For the first time since her father's death, Marta's laughter rang true and clear in the morning air. The sound surprised her. She had almost forgotten what it felt like to be at ease. These people asked nothing of her except to share their company, and their simple acceptance soothed her wounded spirit. As the others chatted, Marta noticed movement in the shadows near the stable door. A small boy, no more than 10 years old, watched them with hungry eyes. His clothes were patched but clean, marking him as one of the stable lads. When he saw her looking, he tried to shrink back into the darkness. "Who is that?" Marta whispered to Greta. "Poor Thomas, orphaned last winter. Works hard, but there's never quite enough to fill him proper," Greta answered softly. Without hesitation, Marta stood and walked toward the boy, holding out her portion of bread. "Would you share this with me?" she asked gently. "It's too much for me alone." The boy's eyes widened, darting between her face and the offered food. Slowly, he stepped forward and accepted it with trembling hands. "Thank you, miss," he whispered. And Marta saw in his grateful smile the same kindness she had known in her father. Later that day, Marta found herself in the Dowager Duchess Helena's private chambers. The elderly woman reclined on a chaise, wrapped in shawls despite the warm spring day. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns across the floor. "Would you read to me, child?" the Duchess asked, her voice fragile but kind. "My eyes tire so easily these days." Marta drew her father's old Bible from her pocket, where she always carried it close to her heart. The leather was worn smooth from years of use, the pages marked with her father's careful notes. She opened to one of his favorite passages and began to read, her voice clear and steady. Unknown to her, Prince Leopold passed the open doorway just then. He paused, arrested by the scene before him, the plain miller's daughter reading with such tenderness to his frail mother. The Duchess's face held a peace he had not seen in many months. Marta continued reading, her voice carrying the weight of Scripture with simple dignity. "Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud." Leopold felt an unwelcome prick in his conscience. He had shown none of these qualities to the woman before him. He turned away, but the words followed him down the corridor. That evening, alone in his chambers, Leopold stood before his mirror. Candles flickered, casting shadows across his aristocratic features. But instead of his reflection, he saw again the scene from his mother's room. He heard Marta's voice in his memory, gentle, unpretentious, carrying none of the artificial sweetness the court ladies used to mask their cruel whispers. His own words from that day by the river came back to haunt him, sharp with mockery. Yet Marta had shown more nobility in sharing her bread with an orphan boy than he had seen in a lifetime of courtly manners. For the first time since she arrived, doubt crept into his heart. Perhaps he had judged too quickly, too harshly. The candlelight wavered, and Leopold turned away from his reflection, unable to meet his own eyes. The palace gardens bloomed with early spring flowers, their delicate petals dancing in the morning breeze. Marta walked slowly along the gravel path, her plain brown dress a stark contrast to the manicured beauty surrounding her. The sound of purposeful footsteps made her turn, and there stood Prince Leopold, his tall figure cutting an imposing silhouette against the rose arbor. "I see you waddle among my mother's prized blooms like a common goose," he said, his voice dripping with practiced disdain. Marta's cheeks flushed, but she met his gaze steadily. "Better a honest goose than a peacock, Your Highness, for at least the goose provides sustenance." Her voice was soft but clear, carrying not a trace of malice. Leopold's eyes widened slightly at her unexpected reply. Instead of storming away as she expected, he fell into step beside her, maintaining a proper distance. "You speak boldly for one of your station. Truth knows no station, Your Highness," she answered, pausing to touch a fragrant white rose. "My father taught me that." The prince found himself lingering, studying her face as she regarded the flowers. There was something disarming about her direct manner, so different from the simpering ladies of the court. In the days that followed, their paths crossed with increasing frequency. What began as chance encounters evolved into brief exchanges in the garden's quiet corners, though their conversations remained formal. A subtle shift occurred with each meeting. One mild afternoon, they discussed the spring planting. "Your fine hands have never known the bite of earth beneath fingernails," Marta observed, noting his immaculate appearance. "And yours?" Leopold asked, genuine curiosity creeping into his voice. "These hands have pulled carrots, kneaded bread, and hauled water since I was a child," she replied, holding up her work-roughened palms without shame. "There is dignity in labor, Your Highness, more than in idleness, however gilded it may be." Leopold's expression softened momentarily. "The gilding grows heavy at times," he admitted, surprising himself with his candor. "These halls echo with whispers and schemes, yet true words are rare as winter roses." The servants noticed these meetings, of course. Whispers spread through the castle like smoke through chimneys. The laundresses exchanged knowing glances when the prince's path led him to the gardens at the same hour Marta took her daily walk. The stable boys gossiped about how His Highness lingered longer each time, how his sharp tongue seemed to dull in her presence. "Have you seen?" Greta whispered to the cook one morning. "They walk and talk like proper folk, not prince and peasant." "At all. Hush now," the cook warned, though her eyes sparkled with interest. "Such talk brings trouble." The encounters continued, each one chipping away at the wall between them. Leopold found himself sharing thoughts he had never voiced to another soul, the crushing weight of expectations, the hollow victory of commanding fear instead of respect, the echoing emptiness of his private chambers. Marta listened without judgment, offering simple wisdom learned at her father's knee. She spoke of village life, of community despite poverty, of finding joy in honest work and simple pleasures. As dusk settled one evening, Marta sat in her chamber, darning her stockings by candlelight. The familiar task brought comfort, and without thinking, she began to sing softly, an old lullaby her mother had sung long ago. Her voice was neither trained nor particularly beautiful, but it carried warmth and peace in its gentle notes. Outside her door, Leopold stood motionless in the shadows. He had come to discuss some trivial matter, but the simple melody stopped him. Through the heavy oak door, Marta's voice carried the song about a mother's love and a child's rest. For a moment, the prince closed his eyes, remembering his own mother's voice from long ago. The candle flickered behind the door, and Marta's song continued, unaware of her listener. Leopold remained still, letting the gentle notes wash over him. Then, without a sound, he turned and walked away, his footsteps silent on the stone floor, leaving Marta to her peaceful solitude and simple song. The castle hummed with preparation as midsummer approached. Servants scurried through stone corridors, their arms laden with garlands of fresh flowers and strings of delicate glass lanterns. The great hall echoed with the tuning of instruments as musicians practiced their festive melodies. Noble families arrived daily in fine carriages, their trunks packed with silks and jewels for the celebration. Marta watched it all from quiet corners, her heart growing heavier with each passing day. The visiting ladies whispered behind painted fans when she passed, their tittering laughter following her like shadows. Yet she straightened her shoulders, remembering her father's words about dignity being earned through actions, not birth. "I shall attend," she told Greta firmly one evening as the laundress helped her into a simple blue gown. "Let them mock if they must. I will not hide." The night of the feast arrived warm and clear, stars twinkling above the castle's highest towers. Hundreds of lanterns cast golden light across the courtyard where tables groaned under platters of roasted meats, fresh bread, and summer fruits. The air carried the sweet notes of violins mixed with the hearty laughter of guests. Marta kept to the edges of the celebration at first, watching nobles twirl in their finery. She found unexpected joy in the company of children who had accompanied their parents to court. Unlike their elders, they showed no cruelty. A small girl in a pink dress tugged at Marta's skirts, begging her to join their circle dance. "Please, mistress, you must dance with us." With a warm smile, Marta allowed herself to be pulled into their ring. Her steps were not graceful, but the children's pure delight made her forget her self-consciousness. They spun together, skirts swishing against the cobblestones, their giggles rising above the music. The dance ended, and Marta stood catching her breath, her cheeks flushed with happiness. The crowd parted suddenly, and she looked up to find Prince Leopold standing before her. Her heart stopped as he extended his hand. "Would you honor me with this dance, Lady Marta?" The courtyard fell silent, save for the gentle melody of the musicians. Marta's hand trembled as she placed it in his. "Your Highness, I am not skilled at court dances." "Then we shall make our own way," he replied, his voice carrying a warmth she had never heard before. He drew her into a simple waltz, his touch firm but gentle. Marta forgot the staring faces around them as they moved together. Leopold's eyes held hers, no mockery in their depths, only a surprising tenderness that made her breath catch. "You dance well for a miller's daughter," he said softly. "And you are unexpectedly kind for a prince who once laughed at me in the mud." She answered with quiet honesty. A smile touched his lips. "Perhaps we have both learned to see beyond first impressions." They turned beneath the lantern light, and Marta felt something shift between them. The music wrapped around them like silk, ribbons binding this moment in memory. For the first time since entering the castle, she felt truly seen, not as the miller's mare or the prince's jest, but as herself. The dance ended too soon. As the final notes faded, reality crept back. The watching nobles pressed closer, their expressions ranging from shock to barely concealed outrage. Marta curtsied deeply to Leopold, her cheeks burning under the weight of so many stares at the edge of the courtyard. Chancellor Reinhardt gathered a small group of influential courtiers. His cold eyes followed Marta as she withdrew from the dance floor. "This cannot be allowed to continue," he murmured, his words carrying deadly purpose. "The miller's daughter grows too bold. If she truly captures the prince's heart, all our carefully laid plans will be for nothing." The ladies around him nodded in agreement, their jewels glinting like serpents' eyes in the lantern light. "What can be done?" one whispered. "Leave that." "To me," the chancellor replied, his thin lips curving in a smile that held no warmth. "Before summer's end, we shall see her removed, one way or another." The morning sun cast long shadows across the council chamber's polished floor. Marta stood before the assembled nobles, her hands clasped tightly to keep them from trembling. Chancellor Reinhardt's cold smile chilled her more than the spring breeze flowing through the high windows. "Your Majesty," the chancellor began, his voice carrying through the hushed chamber, "I bring grave news of deception." From within his formal robes, he withdrew a familiar leather-bound book, her father's journal. Marta's heart seized at the sight of it. This document was found in the chambers of the miller's daughter. Reinhardt's fingers traced the worn spine. With theatrical distaste, within its pages lies evidence of a calculated fraud against the crown. The king leaned forward on his throne, his aged face stern. "Explain yourself, Chancellor. This journal contains references to a supposed land grant." Reinhardt's voice dripped with false concern. "One that would establish noble lineage for this common family." He opened the journal to a marked page, but upon careful examination, the document bears all hallmarks of forgery. Whispers rippled through the assembled courtiers. Marta's voice shook as she spoke. "That journal belonged to my father. It speaks only truth." Silence. The chancellor's command cracked like a whip. "Your father was nothing but a miller, and you," his lip curled, "are nothing but a peasant who sought to rise above her station through deceit." Marta turned desperately to Prince Leopold, who stood rigid beside his father's throne. Their eyes met across the chamber. For a moment, she saw conflict war across his features. The man who had danced with her at the festival, battling with the prince, bound by duty and law. "My son," the king's voice was heavy with authority. "What say you to these charges?" Leopold's jaw clenched. His gaze dropped from Marta's pleading eyes to the floor. "The law is clear, father. Forgery against the crown cannot be tolerated." The words fell like stones in Marta's heart. Tears burned in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Guards," the king commanded, "escort this woman from the castle. She is hereby banished from court." 2 guards stepped forward, their armored hands closing around Marta's arms. As they led her from the chamber, she heard the chancellor's satisfied murmur, "Justice is served." In the courtyard, servants gathered to watch her departure. Greta burst from the crowd, her weathered face streaked with tears. "My dear girl," she sobbed, pressing a small bundle of bread into Marta's hands. "God keep you safe." The orphan stable boy darted forward, his small face twisted with distress. "Miss Marta." He tried to reach her, but other servants held him back. His cries echoed across the courtyard. "Don't let them send you away." Marta's heart broke anew at their grief. "Be brave," she called to the boy. "Remember what I taught you about kindness." The castle gates groaned open. Beyond them lay the road she had traveled what felt like a lifetime ago, now leading her back to disgrace instead of destiny. With each step away from the castle, the weight of loss pressed heavier. Upon her shoulders, the journey home passed in a blur of dust and tears. When she finally reached her father's mill, twilight was settling over the village. The familiar creak of the water wheel offered no comfort now. Thunder rumbled in the distance as storm clouds gathered overhead. Inside the mill, everything remained as she had left it: her father's chair, his tools, the quiet dignity of an honest life. Marta retrieved the Bible from its shelf. its pages worn smooth by years of faithful hands. She sank to her knees on the rough wooden floor, clutching the sacred book to her chest. "Dear Lord," she whispered as thunder rolled closer, "I ask nothing for myself." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "Please, watch over Prince Leopold's soul. Let not his heart grow harder from this day. Teach him that true nobility lies not in birth or station, but in the grace with which we treat others." Lightning flashed through the mill's windows, illuminating her bowed figure for a moment. In that brief, brilliant light, Marta's face showed not defeat, but the quiet strength of one who had faced cruelty and chosen forgiveness. The storm broke overhead, but Marta remained on her knees, praying not for restoration of position or pride, but for the heart of the man who had sent her away. Dark clouds hung low over the village as summer's warmth turned treacherous. The first victims fell ill at dawn, a farmer staggering in his field, a washerwoman collapsing beside her tub. By nightfall, dozens lay burning with fever in their beds, their skin marked with angry welts. Marta moved from house to house without rest, her sturdy frame a beacon of hope in the growing despair. She carried her father's old medicine box, filled with herbs and poultices learned from his teachings. In the cramped cottage of the baker's family, she pressed cool cloths to fevered brows while showing the eldest daughter how to brew willow bark tea. Like this, she demonstrated, her voice gentle despite her exhaustion. 3 spoonfuls, steeped until the water turns golden. The girl nodded, tears tracking down her cheeks as her younger siblings whimpered in their shared bed. Through long nights, Marta scrubbed infected wounds with vinegar and honey, her hands raw from endless washing. She spooned broth into parched mouths, whispering encouragement when hope flagged. In the blacksmith's home, she cradled his infant son while his wife thrashed with fever, singing the same lullabies that once comforted her in the castle. The plague showed no mercy to rank or station. Rich merchants and poor farmers alike succumbed to its grip. Yet Marta moved among them without fear, her faith stronger than her terror. She tore her few good dresses into bandages, used her meager savings to buy medicines from traveling healers. Word of her dedication spread through the countryside. Merchants carried tales to neighboring villages. The miller's daughter tends the sick without rest. Farmwives whispered to passing travelers, "She fears neither death nor contagion." Servants, trading gossip in the marketplace, spoke of her courage. "The miller's daughter is an angel among us." These stories traveled along the winding roads to distant estates, passed from mouth to mouth like precious coins. Within a fortnight, they reached the castle walls, where Leopold sat brooding in his private chambers. "Your Highness," his manservant reported hesitantly, "news from the southern villages. The plague has struck hard, but they say a woman tends the sick with extraordinary courage." "The miller's daughter, sire." Leopold's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. "Leave me," he commanded, but the stories haunted him through sleepless nights. He remembered Marta's gentle voice reading scripture to the Dowager Duchess, her quiet laughter in the garden. The memory of their dance tormented him, her joy so pure, his betrayal so complete. In his darker hours, he paced the castle battlements, torn between duty and growing doubt. "She risks her life for peasants," he muttered, "while I sit safe behind stone walls." The contrast between her sacrifice and his weakness ate at his conscience like acid back in the village. Marta worked until her vision blurred. In Widow Kruger's cottage, she found little Peter burning with fever, his mother already taken by the plague. The boy's small hand clutched her skirts as she settled beside his bed. "Tell me a story," he whispered through cracked lips. "About the castle." Marta smoothed his damp hair, her heart aching. "Once there was a garden," she began softly, "where roses bloomed like stars fallen to earth. ... She described the fountain's silver spray, the peacocks strutting on emerald lawns, painting pictures of beauty to ease his pain. As false dawn crept through the shutters, her voice grew hoarse. Peter's breathing steadied in fitful sleep, but Marta could not rise. Exhaustion claimed her at last, and she slumped against the rough wall beside his bed. Her prayers came slow and thick, like honey dripping from a jar. "Lord, spare this child," she whispered, her eyes heavy as lead. "Take my strength if you must, but let him live." The first true light of morning filtered through the cracks, painting gold stripes across the bare floor, but Marta saw nothing as consciousness slipped away. Her last thought was of her father's smile, of his hands teaching her to bind wounds and ease suffering. In this moment, despite everything, she knew she had lived up to his example. Hoofbeats thundered through the morning mist as Fritz Leopold drove his mount mercilessly forward. 4 days of hard riding had left both horse and rider coated in dust, his fine clothing torn and mud-spattered. The elegant court attire that once marked his station now hung in disarray, but his eyes burned with singular purpose as he guided his exhausted stallion through the village gates. The sight that greeted him stole his breath. Houses stood silent, doors marked with crosses. Thin smoke rose from plague fires where villagers burned contaminated linens. In the town square, a group of weary residents gathered around a lone figure who ladled broth into wooden bowls. Leopold's heart clenched as he recognized Marta. Her face was ashen, her movements slow with obvious fever, yet still she worked. Her plain dress was stained with medicines and sweat, but to Leopold she had never looked more noble than in this moment of selfless service. "Marta," he called out, dismounting with uncharacteristic haste. The villagers drew back in fear and surprise as the prince strode forward. Marta turned, her eyes glassy with fever. "Your Highness," she whispered, swaying slightly, "the plague must not come near. It is too dangerous." But Leopold continued forward until he stood before her. The proud man who had once sneered at her now dropped to his knees in the mud, heedless of the gasps from onlookers. "The true danger was my blindness," he declared, his voice carrying across the square. "I have learned that nobility dwells not in blood, but in deeds. While we at court played our petty games, you gave everything to help these people." Marta's hands trembled as she set down her ladle. "My lord, you need not." "I do need," Leopold interrupted, reaching for her work-roughened hand. "I need, too. Beg your forgiveness. I offer you my heart and hand, even if it means exile from court forever. I would rather live in honest poverty with you than rule in gilded falsehood without you." A commotion at the edge of the square drew attention. Herr Matthias, the frail steward, descended slowly from a carriage, clutching a leather document case. Though his steps were unsteady, his voice rang clear. "There will be no need for exile, Your Highness." The elderly man's hands shook as he withdrew several yellowed papers. "These are the original land grants hidden in the ancient archives. I have spent weeks searching. The Chancellor's accusations were false. The miller's daughter is indeed of noble blood, though her family chose to live simply." He held the documents aloft. "The Chancellor's treachery is exposed. He now sits in the castle dungeons, awaiting the king's justice." A ripple of wonder passed through the crowd. Marta stared at the papers, her father's journal entries now verified as truth, but her eyes turned back to Leopold, searching his face. "The grant means nothing to me now," Leopold said softly. "I love you for your heart, not your heritage." He extended his hand once more. "Will you join your life to mine, Marta Weiss? Will you help me become the man, the ruler I should have been all along?" The gathered villagers, though weak from illness, began to cheer. Their voices rose in a ragged but joyful chorus as Marta's tears spilled freely down her cheeks. With trembling fingers, she placed her hand in his. Leopold rose, drawing her gently to her feet. His face transformed as a smile, his first without any trace of pride or mockery illuminated his features. In that moment, witnessed by humble villagers and the ancient steward, pride and prejudice fell away before the simple power of love. "Yes," Marta whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will." The morning sun broke through the clouds, its light touching the couple as they stood hand in hand. Their hearts united at last in the shadow of affliction, but the dawn of hope. The late spring sunshine warmed the countryside as Marta and Leopold's carriage made its way back to the castle. Villagers lined the winding road, their faces beaming with joy and gratitude. Children scattered flower petals before the horses' hooves, while women held up their babies for Marta to bless. These were the same people she had nursed through the plague, and their love for her shone in every face. "The miller's angel," they called out, "our defender." Their voices rose in waves of affection that brought tears to Marta's eyes. Leopold squeezed her hand, his face soft with pride. "They love you as I do," he murmured. "Not for your newly discovered nobility, but for your heart." At the castle gates, the king himself stood waiting. Time and worry had carved deep lines in his face, but his eyes were kind as he stepped forward to help Marta from the carriage. The old steward stood nearby, clutching the precious documents that had revealed her heritage. "My dear," the king said, taking both her hands in his, "your courage during the plague and your noble spirit have proven you worthier than any princess we might have found. I give my blessing to this union with all my heart." Over the next 3 Sundays, the banns were read in the castle church. Each week, nobles were forced to watch as common folk bakers, blacksmiths, and farmers took the seats of honor near the altar. Marta had insisted on this arrangement, and Leopold had backed her choice. The villagers sat straight and proud in their best clothes, while fine ladies in silk gowns were relegated to back pews. On the wedding day, the castle chapel blazed with hundreds of beeswax candles. Marta wore a gown of cream-colored silk, lovingly sewn by Greta's careful hands. The old laundress had worked countless hours, weaving prayers and tears of joy into every stitch. "You look like an angel," Greta whispered as she adjusted the veil. "Your father would be so proud." The orphan boy from the stables, now dressed in a fine new suit, carried Marta's train with solemn dignity. His chest puffed out with importance as he followed her down the aisle. Leopold waited at the altar, his eyes never leaving her face as she approached. Their vows rang clear through the hushed chapel. "I take thee," Leopold declared, his voice strong and sure, "not as my subject, but as my equal in all things." Response was equally firm, though tears of joy threatened to overwhelm her as summer drew to its close. Marta stood on the castle balcony with Leopold's arm wrapped protectively around her waist. Below, the courtyard teemed with people from every walk of life, nobles and commoners alike gathered to celebrate their princess. "Marta, Marta," they chanted, their voices rising in unison. She raised her hand in greeting, remembering the day months ago when those same courtiers had mocked her. Now they called her name with genuine love and respect. The old steward, watching from nearby, smiled knowingly. "By summer she had given birth," he murmured, "not to a son of flesh, but to a son of hope for the nation." His words carried truth, for in joining prince and miller's daughter, noble and common blood, Marta and Leopold had created something far more precious than an heir. They had given birth to a new way of seeing worth in all people, regardless of their station. Thank you for watching. If this one reached you, consider subscribing. I'll be back tomorrow with more meaning, more humanity.